Exactly 1 year ago yesterday, episode 67 of Dragon Ball Super aired, marking the end of the Future Trunks arc. We so rarely touch on Super as a whole on this channel. My content is generally behind the scenes stuff, but I'm a fan like any of you, and now seems like the perfect time to look back on Super's last major arc and see what worked, what didn't, and why. This is my review of the Future Trunks arc. Let's get started. Episode 47 is where this arc begins, and it marks one of the most dramatic changes to the series in its entire run. After 46 episodes of light-hearted content, saturated colours, and frankly, a real lack of tension, the dreary backdrops and Sumitomo's dramatic music, despite looking and sounding entirely oppressive, feel like a breath of fresh air. It's everything Super drastically needed at this point to engage its viewers, and you can see its lasting effects in future arcs like the Universe Survival arc. Atmosphere is critical, and this arc is oozing it from the very get-go. It's so important, and it plays a vital role in the way this arc's antagonist, Goku Black, is introduced. Prior to this arc beginning, we had a comment from Toriyama that stated, "I put together this story based on a suggestion from the editorial office," and honestly, that absolutely terrified me. Toei's original content hasn't historically been the greatest thing ever, and on paper, the name Goku Black just conjures up ideas of awful fanfiction evil Goku stories. Thankfully, this episode pretty much squashed all of my concerns, and that's down to the presentation, or most critically, the build-up to his reveal. For almost 20 minutes straight, he is nothing but a smoky, shadowy figure. We see him destroying the landscape, he kills Bulma, he brushes aside Trunks like he's nothing, and at the time it looks like he kills Mai too. When the smoke finally clears, Sumitomo's score kicks in and he's finally revealed. We're greeted by Nozawa's terrifying delivery of, "Today is the day your life comes to an end, Saiyajin." It is such a phenomenal way to introduce that character. One of the key phrases writers like to dish out all the time is "show, don't tell," and that's exactly what we have here. There's no tiring exposition about what he's done and how evil he is. It's purely visual storytelling, and it's so effective. Those final lines are the hook, and they do wonders of bringing you into the story. Who is he, and what are his motivations? This arc does a great job of keeping those under wraps for quite some time. This is very important because it allows tension to build. Even as far as episode 50, when Black comes to the present, he's still this mysterious threat. You've all heard the tired old phrase, "we fear what we don't understand," and that's exactly what's in play here. Everything feels entirely hopeless at this point, and they do a wonderful job of hammering that home. Towards the end of episode 50, following the destruction of the time machine, there's a moment where this hopelessness catches up to Trunks and he breaks. We get a touching scene where a lovely orchestral rendition of Chozetsu Dynamic kicks in, and Vegeta tells Trunks that they'll find a way. This is just one of many character moments like this throughout this arc actually. There's more Trunks and Vegeta bonding while they train together, there's the reunion of Trunks and Mai, and while I struggle to suspend my disbelief that Gohan wouldn't ask Trunks why he's back, their episode together is equally as touching. This arc really takes the time to slow things down and establish or build upon characters, and it's all the better for it. Following episode 50 is of course episode 51, and it's here that we're finally given Black's motivation in a spectacular speech delivered through a flashback. He talks about how he wants to eradicate mortals and that they're the gods' only failures. He wanted to rid the world of them to help create his utopia. Structurally, this is placed perfectly as it ties directly into the introduction of Zamasu only 2 episodes later. Episode 53 ends with a speech where Zamasu essentially mirrors Black's original speech, though in far less extreme terms. We get to see the end of his conclusions and the inception of the idea within a few episodes of one another, and that makes Zamasu's inevitable downfall all the more interesting. It also marks the start of a neat little visual motif involving Goasu's tea. It partially clouds here. By episode 55, following the Barbarian subplot, Zamasu is pretty much entirely mirroring Black's speech back in 51, and of course, to complete the motif, Goasu's tea clouds entirely. I loved this. For me, the best villains are the ones you can understand or identify with to some degree. Majin Buu and Cell's motivations aren't interesting. They're evil just because, and as a result, the success of their arcs hinge on moments or cool designs rather than them as characters. In contrast, Frieza, Piccolo, Daimao, and even Vegeta all have clear-cut motivations. Even someone like the Joker that thrives on chaos and toying with Batman has an interesting motivation. To have another villain in Dragon Ball with not just a cool goal, but an overwhelmingly strong core belief is very impactful. Ningen didn't become a meme for no reason. Zamasu is obsessed and he hates them to his very core. Of course, Masako Nozawa and Shinichiro Miki portrayed this idea perfectly, helping to sell these characters as some of Dragon Ball's best. Unfortunately, as a result of being so perfectly aligned, the attempt at a twist in episode 56 doesn't quite hit home. Personally, for not even 1 second did I believe that they weren't connected in some way. Thankfully, the story doesn't exactly hinge on this turning point, so the drama of having to face off against two enemies is just enough to salvage the moment. And face off they do. The production quality of the previous arcs was not great, to say the least. And while this arc up to this point certainly has the odd iffy looking episode, the animation is a significant improvement with genuinely great looking action making its way to the screen on a pretty regular basis. The contents of said action has been a little bit divisive, however. Some fans were not happy that Trunks could stand up to these enemies whatsoever. Personally, I'm not someone who cares for the specifics of power scaling, so the aforementioned episodes of Trunks training with Vegeta were enough for me to understand the consistency here, but I do, at the very least, acknowledge these complaints, consider them mostly valid, and do think in general the series could definitely do a better job of articulating where characters stand against others. For me, my biggest complaint about these early episodes came in the form of Goku's characterization. In fact, it bothered me so much I did an entire video on it in the past, so I'll link that in the description for those interested. Goku is a simple character, but he's a multifaceted one, and keeping the balance between his goofy and serious side is critical in ensuring he feels like himself. In many episodes, the various writing staff exaggerated Goku's dopey side to extremes. You had him crawling over the time machine like a baby, forgetting how to talk to people again, forgetting Senzu, or charging at people and asking them to battle him without a care in the world. These all contain aspects of Goku's character, but they're exaggerated to the point in this arc where they overtake the other aspects of his personality. Thankfully, episode 61 does turn things around a little bit. As Zamasu described what he did to Goku's family, his monumental reaction is a nice reminder that he does actually have human emotions. He is a fully functioning person and not some bizarre caricature. It's just the kind of response the reveal of Zamasu's twisted sense of justice requires. The other response in this episode, of course, comes from Trunks at the very end. Rage power-ups are a staple of the Dragon Ball franchise, and I absolutely love the lead up to this one. Having the man who murdered your mother tell you everything was your fault is certainly a good reason to go into a blinding fit of rage. The presentation of this is lacking, however. Putting aside the abysmal animation in episode 62, this boost isn't ever acknowledged. Gohan's transformation into Super Saiyan 2 isn't actually named until the Buu arc, but at the very least, Cell and everyone around him acknowledges the power on display, and as viewers, it's easy to stomach as rage boosts have been a critical aspect of Gohan's character since his very first introduction. In this instance, Trunks' power-up is never acknowledged. There's no indication of what it is. There's nothing. It's a cool moment and I enjoy the spectacle, but power-ups must be earned in some way. For instance, the concept of Ultra Instinct is something that's been hinted at since Resurrection F, and we're currently watching Goku earn that in the current arc. Sadly, this is just the start of many issues in this arc. For me, episode 61 is very much the divide between the incredible and focused first 3 quarters and the messy and hugely divisive lead up to the finale. Before even touching on the story, I think it's important to acknowledge that even the animation started to take a real hit in this build-up. Episode 62, as I said, was very poor, and despite episode 63 mostly looking great, it split up Yoshitaka Yoshima's input between 2 episodes episodes in a row, and saw Takeo Ide being chief supervisor for 3 in a row. Episode 64 barely moved, and as much as I love Naoki Tate, episode 65 is seriously coming apart at the seams. The plot likewise loses a lot of the focus that made it so compelling in the first place. It takes the characters to and from the future once again, and leads us on a meandering tale to teach the Mafuba to Trunks, which I appreciate exists to force Zamasu and Black to fuse, but there are a million ways of doing that don't totally slam the brakes on the tension that has been building up to this point. Trunks' rage moment from 61 occurs once again, and putting aside that of course it's not even acknowledged again, attempting to do the same scene over and over just doesn't have the same impact. At the very least, there are some positives. I love the presentation of Fused Zamasu. It is so over the top and fitting for a character who thinks so highly of himself. The godly design reminiscent of the kind of thing you'd see in Final Fantasy is really just perfect, with moves like Absolute Lightning and Blades of Judgment. He truly looks like the god he sees himself as. Again, in my recent storyboard video, I mentioned how I love the way the framing always makes Goku and Vegeta look so puny in comparison. He looks like a final boss, and that's all that episode really needed to do. Episode 66 is also very well animated, featuring near enough all of the series' best directors and led by the series director. Much like 65, it captures the scale that a final battle needs and is very enjoyable as pure spectacle. The Potara retcon is a retcon, but it's not necessarily one I personally have an issue with. Narratively, this change isn't so drastic that it makes reading the original series an issue. Toriyama's retcons in the past have followed this pattern of undoing previously established facts without messing anything up too badly, so I feel like this is very much in the same vein. Vegito's return is of course a logical thing, a welcome thing, and the fused versus fused battle is very entertaining. Unfortunately, it is short-lived, and that does lead into the frustrating defeat of Zamasu. Trunks manages to pull out a Genki sword thing and slice up Zamasu with very little difficulty. It essentially comes out of nowhere, and it's the biggest example in this arc of characters doing things they haven't earned. There's no build-up, there's no struggle. It reminds me a lot of how Toei's DBZ films would often have a long battle throughout the middle of the film, and then Goku would finish things off with a single attack to tie up everything neatly in a bow. That certainly happened a few times in the original series, but again, he earned those moves, and that's the critical difference and what bothers me the most. Despite winning this battle, however, they ultimately lose the war and Trunks' world is lost. I'm actually very fine with such a dark ending, or at least the idea of it. This has been an arc packed to the brim with tragedy and emotion, and throwing in a dark ending should be the icing on the cake. The way characters respond to this loss feels very strange though. They return and everyone's smiling and happy, and despite Trunks lamenting over his loss for a very short period of time, he's somehow okay heading off to another world, and all that tragedy is just brushed under the rug. This should have been an opportunity for genuinely upsetting reactions. In Resurrection F, despite that film being very problematic, when Earth is lost, Toriyama wrote a great little scene where everyone spends time letting that loss sink in. Bulma weeps over the death of her parents and son. Time is spent letting that sink in, and the reactions are all there to go along with it. Super's need to wrap up each arc tightly in a bow means that by episode 68, everyone's apparently forgotten about things and are as happy as ever. It is one of the most disappointing and frustrating endings to what I consider Super's strongest arc as of this video. The first 3 quarters are so strong. Structurally, it's sound, its themes are clear, the narrative moves along at a good pace, and tension rises and drops in all the right places. Black and Zamasu are fantastic characters, and are definitely some of my favourites out of the entire franchise. It had great action, it had great music, but it all comes apart as it builds towards and hits that finale. With 15 out of 21 great episodes, it'd be kind of silly to write off this arc entirely. There's so much to love here, and I feel like Black and Zamasu are worth the price of admission alone. 15 out of 21 is a little over 70%, so a 7 out of 10, but despite its messy ending, I feel like my overall feelings towards this arc are between a 7 and an 8. For all its flaws, it's remarkably memorable, and as things stand, it's the closest thing Super has to a real narrative-driven arc. It's the type of story I hope Super's future arcs undertake once it finally moves away from tournaments. But these have been my thoughts, and I am only one person. This is obviously one of the more divisive arcs in the series, so do take the time to let me know how you felt about this arc in the comment section below. Drop me a rating if you thought my thoughts were at least somewhat well presented. Even if you might not necessarily 100% agree with them, that's always appreciated. Subscribe if you're new. Be sure to check out my roundup video from the other day. Toei took down the original upload, so it is back up now. Do check that out. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.